The Nerdcast Empire is on the air. We are back with another episode of Anime Thursdays on the Nerdcast Empire. I am Matt in the studio. Great to have you along with us on a snowy night here in Ohio as winter has finally made its arrival, I guess. Unfortunately, we're going to be doing some podcasting on this Thursday evening. We're going to be talking all things anime, mostly an anime news episode this week. Kind of getting caught up on some big news items that have broken over the last couple of weeks. We'll be talking about that on this episode of the Nerdcast Empire. Did post in the chat that link to our Discord. If you want to join our Discord, we post in there when we're going to be streaming, both on the Nerdcast Empire and on our individual channels, and plus other news and notes. You can join us at the link in the Discord. I think it's good for 7 days. So if you see this within 7 days on the Twitch Live or Twitch VOD, you can click that and join our Discord. Joining us in studio, as always, is Mike. Mike, how's it going?
It's going pretty well. Yeah, talking anime today. Pretty excited about that. I'm five shows into the fall season right now, watching Danmachi Season 5, Shangri-La Frontier, Kenshin, ReZero, Most Notorious Talker. Hoping to pick up a few more still, but everything so far has been quality. Like, there hasn't been that one show that I'm like, okay, I know this has a stupid name, but this show's also really generic and awful. So, yeah, it's been good times.
Helps that there were a lot of big heavy hitters that had new seasons, which is typical in the fall. Fall's a big season for anime, and certainly we had some new shows that people were really excited about, some continuation of shows that people are really excited about, and I think overall people have been pretty pleased with the anime season. In a couple weeks, we'll get around to maybe talking about some of those shows and kind of give everybody an update on what they should be checking out for the fall. And it won't be long, probably in a couple of weeks, we'll be talking about winter as we get into 2025. Already some shows have been announced for the winter, and we'll have that coming up in a couple of weeks on the Nerdcast Empire, so make sure you come back for that. Just a few news items this week on the Nerdcast Empire, and it wouldn't be an anime episode of the Nerdcast Empire without starting off talking about two of our favorite conventions, Ohayocon and Sekaicon. As
one of them really isn't a convention yet.
One of them is a convention in theory. The other is a convention that has certainly gone through a lot of changes, and maybe the word favorite is the questionable part of that sentence at this point, but we'll have to see. But we kind of wanted to give everybody an update because I know this all kind of got some attention over the last couple of weeks because Anime News Network ran a quote-unquote article, and I put that in air quotes because it was really a press release because there was clearly not a lot of research going into the facts that were listed in the article. It was very poorly done by Anime News Network, and they were pretty swiftly corrected in a lot of the comments on their forums, but it did kind of bring a spotlight to these cons again, so we figured it's time to kind of take a look and check in and see where they are. And again, as we talk about these, it is important to note that Sekaicon is in April, so they have 3 more months of everything, announcing guests, planning, whatever, that Ohayocon doesn't have. Ohayocon, first off, didn't know it was going to happen at all. Then they kind of rushed out and said that it was happening. Everything is kind of at warp speed right now because they're going to be in January and they really got a late start on everything. But we'll start with Ohayocon because they have announced guests and actually quite a few guests and guests that people have heard of. Big names in the anime industry, including John Swayze, Rob Mungall, Jay Hickman. Kiba Walker had been previously announced. Trina Nishimura, who's really good. Also, a couple of quote-unquote industry guests with Shinichi Watanabe and Kyle Jones being announced. Again, in that, I guess, call that didn't get totally recorded. They had mentioned they had Mike Center Nicholas. We've not seen any announcement of that. Maybe that's going to come near the end of the registration period. But at the moment, they are kind of chugging along toward having an anime convention here in a couple months. Mike, your general thoughts on kind of where Ohayocon is at this point?
Yeah, it's interesting. By my count, I counted 10 guests that somehow relate to the anime industry in one way or another compared to where we are with Sekaicon, who have yet to announce anybody. Like you mentioned, they do have until April, so there's certainly time, but it's kind of interesting from how I look at them. I almost feel like they're kind of going at it more about building a community that doesn't involve big-name guests, more about kind of a grassroots type thing.
Yeah.
You've seen that with their Anime Day events, and which they just had one a couple weeks ago that was really well received, definitely successful. As far as Ohayocon goes, I don't know what the expectations are for them this year. Obviously, you're moving to Dayton, in which, based on all the comments we've seen on every post that is allowed comments, not the most excited as far as the typical con-going crowd. They're not hyped about going to the Dayton Convention Center over the Hyatt Regency and Greater Columbus Convention Center. Obviously, we're talking a scaled down event, so it'll be interesting to see what it looks like and really what the future is beyond this year, because they're kind of building a new identity. I thought that the article from Anime News Network was a bit interesting. Like you mentioned, it was more or less a press release, since they got the information from an email correspondence. Mentions all the names of the current, or I should say new, senior leadership team, but doesn't really ever mention the fact that this is still a convention under the same ownership.
Yeah.
Which, whether that matters to you or not, I think it matters to the story and to the people who were a part of the boycott, and people that maybe are turned off by knowing it's still the same people running the show, essentially. I think that's kind of a miss from a journalistic point of view.
Yeah, 100%. And again, as we've mentioned, we don't really have a dog in the fight. We had no, other than just attending Ohayocon all these years, and maybe having one or two less than favorable experiences over that stretch of time we attended the convention. We really don't have anything bad to say. And again, I don't want to also make that sound like I'm discounting people who did have bad experiences, because clearly they did, and there were a lot of them.
Yeah.
And it's by and large the reason why Ohayocon went through the split it did, the reason why Sekaicon exists. And those are all very valid reasons to do that. And that's why it is important to people who maybe don't know that, there's at least some point of contention with the current ownership at Ohayocon. Whether she's got any direct decision-making power or not, she's still the owner. It's a for-profit convention. She's going to be making profit, although, again, they said that the money would go back into the con, and it could very well. All we can do is take it at face value, short of having some sort of audit that shows where all that money goes, and it's probably not going to happen. I think I like the way, in some ways, the Sekaicon is going about things. I think these anime days are great. I think it's a great way to build a community. It's something I really wish Ohayocon would consider going that route. And again, to some degree, they'll get a little bit of a pass this year because it all kind of got thrown together. And my guess is Dayton probably wasn't their first choice, even though they're going to sell it as such.
Sure,
because
you have to.
You have to at this point. You have to make it, as bright and shiny a situation as you can. But I would like to see more of that from Ohayocon. I feel like that's something Matsuricon, I think you've seen them run like community events outside of movie
regularly.
days.
You see like tabletop events that they run in Columbus. They clearly have some sort of ground game in terms of fostering a community.
And I think that's, and we've seen it even, I've seen posts from Animazement down in the Carolinas that do the same thing, where they have these events throughout. In fact, they've got one coming up, I think, with some sort of movie night and things like that. And to me, if you're going to run an anime convention that's going to get big, I think it needs to be, unless you're running the biggest of the big conventions where it is the whole focus of your life to run Otakon or Anime Expo or whatever. I think having that ability to aid the community, to get out and have these events, for people to get to know you at these events, because I think that's a big part of it too, is you can show up and you can talk to these people, and it's a good way to get staff, because you show up at these small events and you find other like-minded people like, hey, I'd like to help out or get started with an anime convention, but I don't really know how. And you can kind of, feel those people out and make sure that you're bringing in good people that are kind of on the same cause as you. And I think that's something Sekaicon is doing really well through these anime days. I will say, I would like to have seen them announce a few anime-related guests by now, if for no other reason, because there is that natural comparison to Ohayocon. You kind of want to see what guests are going to Ohayocon, what guests are going to Sekaicon. Is there an overlap? Because I think that's one of the things, and I think you had mentioned it, you'd seen it on a forum somewhere, and I think it's worthy of mentioning that, yes, there will be certain guests that are going to be very loyal to one side or the other. If they've had a long-standing relationship with Ohayocon, they're probably going to want to continue to go to Ohayocon. If they had some sort of bad experience with Ohayocon, maybe they would go to Sekaicon. But I think by and large, and I think, like I said, you saw the comment. I think it's probably true. Most industry people don't care. They just, they're just happy to be invited to conventions.
Yeah, I mean, really, the people running the convention is probably the last thing on their mind. It's more obviously getting paid to be there and also interacting with the fans who ultimately aren't part of any of the drama that's going on. I also wonder too, if you're an actor or someone in the industry and you've been coming to these all over the country, if not world, for years, is this kind of old hat for you? Like, have you seen numerous instances where the convention culture within a city has had drama like this, and you've seen offshoot conventions pop up? I feel like it may feel new here, but when you consider that it's happened to Columbus now twice in the past 20 years, maybe it's a little more frequent than you realize.
Well, and I think we've been to panels over the last 16, 17 years where it's like anime con horror stories, where these guests, voice actors, have had these crazy experiences. Some of them are just malicious experiences with conventions and people running it, because I remember there were a couple of cons, specifically I think in Texas, where they were like, nobody should go there, we'll never go back there, it was really, really bad. And other times where it's just some wild thing that happened to them while they were in the city that was nobody's fault other than just circumstance. And so, yeah, I think a lot of the people who are industry vets have probably seen it all, maybe a couple of times. So I don't think that matters. And that's why it's like it would be kind of interesting to see who Sekaicon's going to invite, who they're going to bring in. And
that being said, they've kind of positioned themselves maybe a little better than we would have thought initially, because we were kind of talking before the show, GalaxyCon Columbus is coming up in a couple weeks.
Yes.
And it's stacked with guests. I have to wonder what kind of effect that has had and will have in the future on any kind of January, early February maybe convention, where you have a lot of these names probably just don't want to come back to Ohio every couple months.
I mean, let's be real. I mean, most of these guests are leaving Texas and California to come to Ohio in the dead of winter, which has always been a little strange. Now, there's some of these guests are maybe from the Midwest and they like snow in the winter, and maybe they like to have seasons and they want to come and experience that, because we've heard stories about that over the years. To me, and I'll be curious to see how it goes, but I feel like if Ohayocon is going to make it, which, again, all signs point to, at least at the moment, they're going to continue chugging along. And if they're going to continue in Dayton, you do have to wonder if it doesn't make some sense somewhere down the road to pivot to a later date in the calendar, because I think a lot of the consternation about the hotel situation would be a lot different if the con was in May as opposed to January, because there are places nearby. There are some nice areas near where the convention center is, some kind of like hip and trendy areas where you kind of like some of the places we see in Raleigh that are, place you can go get a meal and whatever. And hotels would be a little more reasonable to think about walking a good distance if it wasn't January, when it could be like it is right now outside in November, snowing and 32 degrees. Like, nobody's going to want to walk a long distance. So,
and it's also my assumption that you're not having to worry about other conventions running in Dayton the rest of the year, where late January, early February is strategic.
Right.
You may not even. I don't know if there's a reason for that scheduling in a place that doesn't seem to have a really flourishing convention scene.
Yeah, 100%. And one thing we've talked about doing, and I don't know if there's an interest in this, and if there is, maybe we'll consider doing it, is we were going to check the convention schedule for the Dayton Convention Center and see if there was anything between now and January that remotely sounded interesting to attend and go.
Just to scout the place.
To maybe take our video cameras and just kind of get an idea of what this looks like. And, let us know in the comments of the VOD, or I guess on YouTube, or reach out to us if that's something you'd be interested in seeing. And we'll take a look. Maybe there's not anything. I don't know. Or maybe we can just go up on a weekday, stop by Izakaya, and then swing on over to the Dayton Convention Center and just get an idea of what this place looks like, because
I'm curious.
I am too.
At the very least.
A lot of this whole situation is curiosity at this point.
Yeah.
And what it is beyond that, a lot's going to depend on what these two conventions do in the first year, because fair or not, there are a lot of conventions on the circuit. You already mentioned GalaxyCon, but there are a lot of other anime conventions, and you really only have maybe this 1 year for both of them to kind of show like this is what we're going to be going forward. Obviously, Sekaicon probably gets a little more of a pass because they're brand new, so they might get a couple of years. But with Ohayocon, people want to know that it's going to be a good experience, that they're going to have a good time, that Dayton's going to be a good host. And if it's not, they'll just find another convention in January to go to because there are certainly a bunch of them in warmer places than Ohio. So the whole thing is very interesting. We'll certainly continue updating you on it as we get closer. And again, if we do end up going up to the Dayton Convention Center, we'll let everybody know. And if we do end up doing some sort of video of it, we'll probably watch it on the podcast and kind of give everybody an idea of what that place looks like. Because honestly, I'm really curious.
It kind of makes you wonder what goes in to the process of building a convention from nothing. Because, I mentioned GalaxyCon already, but they also own the Animate Columbus convention that runs in June, and they have their website up for 2025, June 13th through 15th, and they already have voice actors listed as scheduled guests. So if you're starting a nonprofit convention group, like, what's your strategy? Because you're ultimately probably not going to be able to compete with GalaxyCon in terms of booking guests. I think you almost have to go about it maybe like the Sekaicon route, where it's just let's build a community of fans. And in thinking that, I would certainly like to see some fan-run panelists that we are familiar with be added to the schedule sooner rather than later, just to see that there is that kind of commitment to fan community panelists running at your convention.
Yeah, because honestly, the Kick Punch Co-op guys, the Anime Hell guys, if they decide they're going to Sekaicon, that would certainly heavily influence my decision to want to go, because those guys kept us at Ohayocon for many, many years.
The Ohayocon game show was routinely the best panel.
It may be one of the best panels at any convention ever.
Yeah.
In the
so well done.
17 years we've been going to anime conventions. That one's in the top 3 probably of best panels, and certainly when you consider it was a recurring panel and how much work went into it, it may be number 1. So yeah, that's a good point too. Maybe you go for maybe smaller VAs, or maybe one really big voice actor and a couple of smaller ones, but then you really nail it on the fan panel side and build it from there. So it's going to be interesting. And we would like to eventually run panels at conventions as well. Stay tuned for that as we continue to kind of grow our brand as well moving forward. But that's kind of the latest update on Ohayocon and Sekaicon. We'll maybe try a December update a little bit later in the month as we get a little closer to Ohayocon. Most everything else we have is just kind of straight ahead news articles. So we'll kind of get to this one. And this one is something that obviously could really send some ripple effects through the anime industry. The news broke in the other day that Sony Music Entertainment, they are in talks to potentially acquire Kadokawa from Japan. Sony already has a 2% stake in Kadokawa, but they're talking about potentially acquiring them completely. And obviously, Kadokawa handles some of the biggest properties in Japan. I think everybody's pretty well aware of what Sony is up to. Kadokawa did release a statement, which I'll post that link as well, which was kind of a follow-up story to basically say, yeah, there is fire where there is smoke, but the company will make an announcement in the future if there are any facts that should be announced. So no decision has been made at this time. But again, we've talked about this a lot on the podcast. It's always a little concerning when the industry continues to shrink. And this would be yet another mega company absorbing another mega company. While there would be, I'm sure, some benefits from it, you just can't help but think that overall it's probably not great for the industry as a whole, but I'm curious to get your thoughts on it.
Yeah, it's scary, but I guess I kind of see it from Sony's perspective too, where if they don't, someone else will. Like, you know, I'm sure Disney's constantly in an acquisition mode, so that's always a possibility. I mean, I don't know how much money Netflix has running around, but I'm sure they would love to own more studios that generate really successful IPs. Kind of from the gaming side, it's interesting. Because obviously you have Kadokawa, who owns From Software, makers of the Dark Souls and Elden Ring. Big deal there. They own Spike Chunsoft, who does like the Danganronpa games, Dragon Ball Sparking Zero, as well as countless visual novels. I think that's kind of their thing too. acquires another group within Kadokawa. They're kind of known for Octopath Traveler. They own anime properties like ReZero, Steins Gate, Sword Art Online, Overlord. This could be huge in multiple arenas, not just anime or gaming, but across the board. And I'm not excited because I feel like Sony's one of those companies who I've been pretty suspect on what they've done in the past few years. So I don't know. Not optimistic.
Yeah, I mean, certainly them being involved with Funimation and the whole Crunchyroll thing hasn't exactly gone well here stateside, unless you are Crunchyroll, in which case it's gone very well. I think, you mentioned it from the Sony standpoint. I think from the Kadokawa standpoint, you have two ways of looking at it as well. Number one, you don't want to be in a situation where Sony acquires a competitor of yours and now you're up against that competitor and Sony's money to where you start to feel the pinch of being the small fish in the market. And you want to make sure that as long as these big companies are throwing money around, you want to seat at that table to make sure you're getting offers from Disney, from Netflix, from whatever property, NBC, obviously also involved. It's concerning. I mean, there's no question about it. I think, if you want to look at a glass half full, if you really believe that them acquiring Kadokawa would do things like improve conditions for animators or anything like that, then you could think that way. But nobody is really that naive to think that's the case. Like, more of it will probably be farmed out to AI or possibly third world countries to make it cheaper and faster, because that's kind of how these businesses work. So it is going to be a big story in 2025, one way or another, whether it goes through or it doesn't go through. It's going to have a ripple effect on, like you said, really everything that comes out of Japan, whether it's animes, whether it's video games, whether it's movie properties, visual novels, as you mentioned. It's going to be huge, and I don't think this is going to be the last of these type of stories. I think 2025 is going to be full of them, as we're going to see these big companies try to basically eat up the smaller companies and take control of the market so that they can be the ones. And then, you silo the content, which is what we're going to see. If Sony acquires these anime properties, where are they going to go? They're going to go to Crunchyroll, worldwide. So then what does that do? Netflix has to acquire somebody else so they can eat up their properties and silo them on Netflix. And it becomes this never-ending cycle where who loses in the end is the consumer, because you end up having to have all these different systems and subscribe to these different companies to be able to watch all the anime you want to watch, because they're all siloed in their own company instead of being available in multiple places.
Yeah, and I think it's worrying too, because I know in the article they mentioned Sony also having opened up essentially like an academy to train future animators to develop properties both for Japan and then also the Western market. And it doesn't make you feel good when the talks of them buying up this really big Japanese producer, knowing that they have an eye on content for a wider audience, when most of us are fans of anime, and even in my case, like Japanese role-playing games, because they're not like what we have over here already. They're different. I don't want that stuff to be sacrificed because they think making it more appealing to the Western market will make it more money, because that hasn't always been the case.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people over here want it because it is so different, as Chris mentioned in the chat. Welcome, Chris. Hungry Hippos, the licensing edition. Yeah, I mean, it becomes everybody going for that last marble on the table. And, you hope that the other issue, too, is in the United States, if this were all being conducted here, you have monopoly laws in place. Now, how well those are being enforced, you just never know. Probably goes year to year, but you're obviously seeing it right now with Google having to go through what they're going through and potentially having to divest Android and divest Chrome and things like that. This is Japan, though. We're talking, the situation in Japan. How Japan deals with potential monopolies, we don't know. Like, their court system's completely different, and the laws are completely different. Maybe their courts would step in and say, no, you guys can't do this. This is going too far. Or maybe they wouldn't. So it's going to, again, have wide-ranging impacts worldwide that we're really not even sure what all those are going to be at this point.
It rarely comes out in the favor of the consumer.
No
matter how it turns out.
No, the consumer almost always loses. And yeah, Chris mentioning, companies changing aspects to try to reach a Western audience. Yeah, I mean, that's just it. It's okay to make content in the West that is for the West. That's completely fine, and you're welcome to do that. But people buy stuff from Japan because it is different. That's why I like anime. That's why I don't watch Western cartoons generally, and not since I was little and I was watching Tiny Toon Adventures and Animaniacs, and
they were great.
And Gummy Bears, and all the.
But even that, it's you're not watching it to scratch the same itch that anime
correct
handles. Like, it's a different product line, and that's fine. I think they both deserve to exist. But
sure, yeah,
there's no need to blend the two.
No, for sure, and you worry as the mega companies just continue to fight over properties that will be headed that direction. So it'll be, again, we're going to have to keep an eye on it. Like I said, I don't think this is the last story like this we're going to get as we head into 2025, but it is one that is definitely merits watching. And maybe Kadokawa just decides, no thanks, but no thanks, because that's something else that's different in Japan, is sometimes those companies don't just take the big paycheck. They decide they want to keep doing things their way, and, that's the way they do business. So we'll certainly update people as we get updates on that in the coming year. A couple of, or at least one story about a new remake or some sort of additional anime from an old property. The news came out from Disney, as you mentioned them earlier, that they are producing a new anime adaptation of Tsukasa Hojo's Cat's Eye, which will be on Disney Plus in 2025. The video, or the Anime News Network story on there, includes the video, which includes Otto covering the original Cat's Eye opening theme, which, first off, more shows should do that. Like, just bring in a modern artist and cover the classic opening theme, because that's what everybody wants to hear. And second, Cat's Eye is a big deal. We see it a lot when we look at like classic anime lists. People really love that show. And we've seen it time and time again of late, these shows from the 70s and 80s that are getting reboots or reworks or new materials that are doing really well, and people are really excited about it. So, kind of interested to see what this ends up looking like. I don't know if I'll ever get to watch it, but at least, for fans of the original Cat's Eye, this could be an exciting new property for them.
It could be exciting, but it could also be devastating. Depends on how they handle it. I don't know how far Disney is entrenched in the production of this, since they are funding it. I could see that going in a bad direction. It's kind of interesting, because I was reading the comments under the story, and it's not like Cat's Eye was like a huge deal over here when it was around. Like, it wasn't ultra successful. I think there's a passionate fan base for it, but it kind of sounds like this might be something used to maybe, because they said it was really popular in Europe. Like, maybe this could be used as a vehicle to try to drive more subscriptions to their service outside of the United States. We'll see. I mean, if it's done well, that'll be awesome. I'm totally for anything old looking newer. But yeah, time will tell.
Yeah, and obviously you don't know. I mean, I think at this point we're getting to the point where more of these remakes have been good rather than bad, which is encouraging. And like you said, I don't think this is necessarily, because it was announced at an APAC convention. So, I mean, this clearly wasn't necessarily announced with the West in mind.
Yeah.
Like, this is clearly something they're trying to sell to Asia Pacific, which is kind of interesting in and of its own right, that they're kind of doing it there. And I think, as kind of tying it into the last story, as we see these big companies trying to continue to find ways to make money off of anime, yes, we'll have new series continue to be licensed for these streaming services, but I also think we're going to continue to see these older series that did have some level of popularity get rebooted or get an OVA or get a movie or something, because it didn't specify in the article whether this is a new series or if it's a movie or a continuation or whatever it may be. So we'll still have to wait and see what that's going to be. But, I think that's maybe a topic for a podcast coming up, is, we'll come up with a list of, 5 shows each that we think could use a remake, because there are some out there that you would really like to see kind of a HD remake of the original show, just to allow it to be preserved kind of for future generations.
But my concern is that they're going to reach this decision of why was it never really popular in the West? Not because it didn't come over here initially, I don't think, but it'll be, well, clearly it just didn't appeal to the Western audience well enough. Well, how can we alter this adaptation that will appeal to the Western market and then realize that doesn't work either?
Yeah, the only thing I would wonder is whether this show is niche. It's almost too niche to even attempt that.
That's a good
because
question.
It's, there are other anime properties where you could see it very easy. You could pretty easily make a Western version of it. Like, I'm not sure this one, because like I said, I mean, it wasn't even 100% popular in Japan. It was more in Europe. So, I think if you're going to do that, I think something a little bit bigger of a property potentially would make more sense for potential revenue than to rewrite Cat's Eye, which still might not sell anywhere then. And then you and I don't even know how much it would cost, but
a lot of questions.
Yeah, and obviously with anything like this, we'll see how it goes. But obviously, a lot of the Rumiko Takahashi reboots have gone really well. People are pretty excited about those. So we'll see if this continues to the trend that they'll try to be as faithful to the original as possible when they redo these, and if not, the fans will probably revolt and not buy it, and then we'll go from there. But let's talk about something that probably could use some new material. That's going to get at least some new material, and that is news about Haruhi Suzumiya and a franchise crowdfunding campaign. Basically, was just simply for a new song and a company music video. Were the two goals that they had for this, and it reached its goals on day one. It was supposed to end on January 15th. It raised over 25 million yen, or about $164,000. And, the original goal of funding a new song with the three girls in the series, including 3D modeling. The second goal also adds a couple of other characters as well. They're bringing in Akihata, who's done so much. She obviously was involved with writing Hari Hari Yukai. She's done a bunch of stuff for Love Live as well. And Tomokazu Tashiro will be the composer of whatever new song they come out with. And, obviously nothing real heavy in the story other than that's kind of cool to see there's still a strong popularity for this series. But it just continues to beg the question, are we ready for another series of Haruhi Suzumiya? Because I think there are still a lot of fans, especially people our age, that would get into a new anime of this series.
Yeah, it kind of feels like the successful campaign is really more of a cry for beyond this. Like, okay, we're going to throw money at this new music video, this new song, and I think one of the backer rewards is also like an audio drama.
Yeah.
We're fine with that, but you have to read the tea leaves here and see this is us saying we need another series. We need more content beyond just what you're offering here.
I think Haruhi Suzumiya, and I know I've said this on this podcast before, I still think it's maybe one of the most underrated anime series of all time. First off, it was really what spurred a lot of the convention boom of the late 2000s with people doing the Hari Hari Yukai dance and everywhere, literally. Yeah. Walk out of a door of a convention and there'd be a group of people with a boombox doing this dance out in the lobby or whatever. And, the fact that the series basically had two watch orders, the original series, they showed it in non-linear watch order, which was the TV version. And then when you got the DVDs, they were in linear order. And at the end of every episode, you would have Haruhi saying it was episode this, and Kyon would say, no, it's episode that. And one of them was giving you the broadcast TV order. I think it was Kyon. And you had Haruhi giving you basically the chronological order of when you should watch the episode. And they told kind of different stories depending on what order you watch them in. I don't think any other show has successfully managed to do that. And then you had, obviously, the second season, which I know people crapped on the Endless 8. I watched every one of those episodes. And, it was kind of knowing what it was going to be. Like, it was fun. But then you also had the making of episode 0, which was the rest of season 2, where you figure out, how all that went down. To me, that was anime. Like, that was everything about that series was what made anime great. And I would love to see them bring back and tell more stories in anime form.
Yeah, it makes me wonder if the lack of love that it gets now isn't somehow tied to the industry crashing, because it came out pretty much right before that.
Yeah.
Like you saw, as we're at conventions in 2008, watching ADV completely implode on top of other companies getting bought up and dissolved. And I don't know if there's like some weird resentment that was one of the biggest shows right before it all came crashing down. It just brings back bad memories for people.
Yeah, because you have that and you had Lucky Star. I kind of think of those two hand in hand because it's a lot of the same cast that worked on both. And, Ai Hirano is the main voice actress in both series. And you also had these dances and songs. And, I remember sitting in on the one panel where they gave out the T-shirts of like the skirt.
It was like they were blowing out the budget on these releases right as
everything was coming down around them.
Exactly.
Yeah, down the hall they're talking about how they were going to save ADV with Kids on the Slope.
Yeah, great show, by the way. Yeah. Absolutely tremendous show.
Did not save ADV, as it turned out, unfortunately. But, it is kind of a dichotomy of that time. That was Otakon, I think, in 2008.
Yeah.
When all that kind of went down. And
Along with Baltimore.
Along with Baltimore, as it turns out. Still loved our trips to Baltimore, albeit we had some wild times for sure there. But, kind of sad that that's no longer the home of Otakon. Now they're in D.C., But yeah, it's interesting. Maybe there is some sort of tie to that, but we're going to be coming up on, I would assume pretty soon, the 20th anniversary of the anime release. I would think maybe that would be a good time. Maybe this is what we're testing the waters for, is some sort of new 20th anniversary anime project.
You hope so, but you also don't want to see a trend form where it's going to require massive Kickstarter campaigns to get people to actually create more content on a proven commodity.
Yeah.
Like, we shouldn't have to buy these kind of things in advance. You should just be making them.
Yeah, for sure. Albeit, if you want to tell me you're going to make another season of it, I will probably contribute to that. But yeah, you're right. I mean, we just talked 2 stories ago about Sony and Kadokawa and all this money.
Yeah.
And now it's like, if you want to chip in $5, we can make another season of Haruhi Suzumiya. So, yeah, I would like to see them actually be a little more proactive on that. But if you haven't watched it, you should definitely go back and watch it. If you can find the broadcast order for the first season, find it and watch those episodes in that order. That, to me, is the authentic Haruhi Suzumiya experience. And then if you can get through all 8 episodes of the Endless 8 and watch them all, I think you get a medal or something. I'm not sure. But hopefully more Haruhi Suzumiya. At the very least, there will be a little bit of new content from them coming up in 2025. A couple other news stories to wrap up this week are music related as well. The news that Nano and Mad Kid are going to have a joint concert tour in North America in early 2025. Not a ton of dates for this, which is kind of a shame. That's always the thing about these conventions, or these tours, is they're kind of West Coast centric. There is a date in Chicago on February 5th in New York and February 6th. Otherwise, you're looking at San Diego, San Francisco, LA, Mexico, Dallas, and Toronto. But we've seen Nano. Nano was great.
Yeah.
Would definitely go watch Nano again. I know Mad Kid is one that you're more familiar with. I think they did a lot of stuff for Rising of the Shield Hero.
Shield Hero.
So kind of cool to see these two kind of touring together.
Yeah, absolutely. And, they no one can say they didn't tour the Midwest. They did go to Chicago. So
that is the Midwest.
Basically, yeah, just hitting all the cities you expect when any kind of foreign act comes over to the United States. You kind of like to see a few more reasonably distanced concert stops, but it is what it is. Always excited to see more Japanese acts coming over here.
And I know we talked a few weeks ago about Otto announcing a big stadium tour in the U.S., and I've seen some posts on X that people not being able to get tickets because they were had sold out, or had sold well, at least for some of these shows. So that's great news, because we kind of wondered at the time, whether there would be kind of enough demand to run these bigger venues, and evidently the answer is yes. So that's
what it tells me, is that there are clearly a lot of people that are actually digging into these artists' catalogs, because if you only know 1 or 2 songs, you're probably less likely to go see it live.
Yeah, and I think that's great. Check out everything that these artists are doing, and Nano had a lot of great stuff, and obviously Mad Kid as well. So That's really cool. And again, as we talk about on the music show all the time, if you get a chance to go to one of these shows, if you live in one of these cities where they're bringing these tours in, make sure you go, because that's the only way these are going to continue. If people buy tickets to these shows, then, they're going to bring more of these shows over. I really wish they'd stop running this part of the country in January and February. And I don't know if that's just the only time where these Japanese artists are free, because we saw it with Vicky Blanca, who came through Chicago in like January or February this
no one
past
wants to
year.
be in Chicago in January.
No, I mean, it's not necessarily the nicest. I mean, it's just cold and miserable. Like, come through in April or May, and I'll absolutely drive up to Chicago and
I can handle miserable, but cold and miserable, I refuse.
That's what it is here right now. So, yeah, definitely don't want to do that. But hopefully it does well. Nano, obviously, like I said, we've mentioned before, she's really cool, and Mad Kid really good. So if you are near one of those places where they're going to be touring, make sure you check them out. One last news story, which is just kind of an interesting one to end on, the news from Crunchyroll's website that the opening theme to Evangelion, Cruel Angel's Thesis, has reached 100 million views on YouTube. The news was announced by King Records on November the 20th. Obviously, Yoko Takahashi sang that song. I think for a lot of people, even people who maybe aren't into anime, that is kind of one of those go-to songs that people think about when they think of anime opening themes. Probably a very popular karaoke choice for a lot of people when they go to sing anime themes. We talk a lot about certain themes being overrated, and it would be easy to say that this one is overrated, but in some ways it's both overrated and underrated, because it is everywhere. And for a long time, if you watch any list of anime themes, no matter how old the person was who made the video, they always threw this song on there, even if clearly all the rest of their music was from the last 5 years. But at the same time, I still contend that when you watch this video, the opening sequence, and you hear the music and everything else that went into it, it probably set a lot of tropes that were going to be used across anime for even to this day. It may be one of the most important opening themes. And like I said, I think it's a little underrated because it's overrated, because people, I think, talk about it being one of the best of all time. And in the reality, it's just a really good opening theme.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think a lot of my favorite openings, and probably the best ones, objectively, if that's even a thing, follow a certain template, and this song may have kind of established that.
Yeah.
As far as what you're seeing on the screen and just the structure of the song, anything that feels like that, to me, I really enjoy. So, yeah, it's always interesting, like you mentioned, when you have that person's top 100 of all time, and it's the only song from the 90s. Like, there were some other really good ones then, too. I don't myself even feel ready to tackle of all time lists.
Yeah.
I don't have everything I need for that. Maybe sometime next year I'll get around to that, but I don't know what it is. I think people realize the show's kind of important too.
Yeah.
So all things being equal, the song's going to get a bump for that too. But yeah, it's classic. 100 million views, a big deal. Doesn't put it anywhere near kind of the top of YouTube as far as music videos go. We're still reaching for that Baby Shark dance at 15.27 billion views. Despacito at 8.58 billion views. I didn't realize, Gangnam Style by Psy, it's only at like 5.35 billion.
Which is amazing, because that song's great.
I feel like there was a time when it was the highest viewed.
Yeah.
But man, it's now number 10 according to this list on Wikipedia. So both it and Cruel Angel's Thesis have a ways to go.
For sure. And I don't know, because I didn't check, whether this version of the song is region locked in Japan, because a lot of times you'll see that on these type of articles where they mention, hey, this got 100 million views, and you go to click on it, it's not available in the United States because it is only released in Japan. Now, I can find 1,000 videos on YouTube that have this opening theme on there. It's one that does tend to make it through, but I don't know if that particular version is actually available worldwide or if that's only available in Japan. You mentioned the show is important. I do wonder how many times it ends up on somebody's watch list and they've never actually watched the show. Like I know the show's important, so I'm putting it on my best openings list, but I've never actually watched Ava because you should watch it. I know it gets memeified because of the way it ended, but the TV series is good, and there's a lot going on there. If you can find the Platinum Edition from ADV that includes Matt Greenfield's director's commentary, it's definitely worth going through it a second time to hear all the symbolism in the show. But the thing that blows my mind is someone who's would not consider themselves a great video editor, but at least has the idea and the basics of video editing, is a lot of the things they do in that open, especially the sequence when the chorus comes back and they start slam cutting through the different characters, is very easy to do in Adobe Premiere Pro, but way harder to do when you're talking cell-based animation editing from the late 1990s. Like, the fact they were able to do that so fluidly, and
they knew this was money.
Oh, for sure.
Otherwise, you wouldn't. I don't know what the budget was when they produced this, but I assume it was stout for the time.
Yeah, for sure. I'm curious. I don't care if that's one of those shows where they list how much per episode.
I also think, too, if you're a fan of more modern anime, chances are you've watched numerous shows with a male protagonist that in some way owes his existence to Shinji, as far as if you're watching a show with a weak will, just kind of off-puttingly weak, I guess, main character, he was kind of one of the old school versions of that.
Yeah, I there's no question that he was the inspiration for a lot of those. Unfortunately, because in some ways it worked with Shinji. I don't know if it always works in these harem shows that you watch, but I think it worked in a show like Nadesco, where they basically flipped it with the same voice actor on its head and kind of changed his character around. But I was looking.
They made his character relatable.
Yeah,
like Akito was way more normal.
Yeah.
And you could root for him, where Shinji maybe not so much all the time.
Yeah. But it's like when you see Gendo, it's like, well, no wonder Shinji ended up the way he did. That dude's clearly not any kind of balanced at all. Yeah. So definitely worth checking out. Really awesome to see it have so many views, even if it's just in Japan. And it is one of the all-time great opening themes that everybody should check out. And again, kind of appreciate where it's come from. And it also spawned probably hundreds, if not thousands, of meme opens. Like, if you think of just about any one of your favorite anime series that has any kind of popularity, there's a good chance somebody has created an Ava-style open with those characters. Some of them are really well done, so definitely worth checking out if you ever get the chance. But Cruel Angel's Thesis, over 100 million views.
The other thing, too, is this YouTube video is on King Records' YouTube channel. It was uploaded 6 years ago.
So
how many views did they not get because they just uploaded it 6 years ago?
Yeah. And I have to assume it's a case where somebody had an illegal version of it uploaded and it was getting crap loads of views, and somebody's finally told them, hey, you guys should upload an actual official version of this so you're making the revenue off of, instead of, Shinji Fan 321 or something like that on YouTube. So, but yeah, that's interesting. And I've seen more and more of that. Also, and this is not related to anime at all, but I want to throw this in before we go off the air. I got recommended a video on YouTube from the Band-Aid channel. Was it Band-Aid or Live Aid? Can't remember. Do they know it's Christmas?
Band-Aid.
But it was called Band-Aid 40, and it looked like maybe an HD remaster of the original Do They Know It's Christmas that just came out like over the last 2 or 3 days. So I didn't watch it yet. Have to watch it. Still one of my favorite all-time Christmas songs, and probably one of the best modern Christmas songs out there.
So we got here the TV size, just the opening credit list, 4.9 million views. That's impressive from 3 years ago.
Yeah.
I don't see anything older yet, which I assume if it had been,
taken.
Wow, seriously? Oh no, this is someone doing an English cover.
Okay.
From 7 years ago, 24 million. That's legit. Yeah.
Yeah, the Cruel Angel's Thesis parody of King of the Hill. I forgot about that one, but that's a great one also, for sure. But again, if you almost any property, if you're a fan, and they did a Cruel Angels Thesis cover of it. But yeah, no shortage of versions of that on YouTube.
Some weird stuff on here.
For sure. But that's going to bring our podcast to a close for this snowy Thursday night in Ohio. Great to have you along with us once again. If you didn't get a chance to see, if you're on twitch.tv, if you're looking at the VOD at the beginning of the chat, there is a link to our Discord. We're going to try to get in the habit of posting that on every episode so you can join our Discord. We're continuing to build it out, so it's a work in progress, but Chris has done a lot of work on it, so really appreciate that, and we're going to continue to kind of build that up in the days and weeks to come so that we can make that kind of the hub for the Nerdcast Empire. So this Sunday, we've got Music Weekly once again, the music of November the 8th this week.
Yes.
And my understanding is it's a little bit better than what we had last week.
It's not bad. I think we'll be okay.
I think we'll be okay. Also, if you're on our social media, if you're on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, you are seeing shorts go up now every day between now and I think December the 6th, which are our weekly episodes kind of shrunk down into shorts form of Music Weekly, and also Mike's Vault Picks, those videos will come out on the weekend. So you'll see another weekly episode one tomorrow at noon, and then Saturday, Sunday, you'll have Mike's Vault Picks, episodes 2 and 3 of those. So check those out, share them. They're bite-sized, they're really easy to pass around, but we're trying to build our shorts stuff or reels, so please share those around. So we got Music Weekly coming up Sunday. No midweek podcast next week because of American Thanksgiving, so we will have next Thursday night off. But we will have 2 podcasts next week because a week from Saturday we'll have a post-Survivor Series recap. Haven't done a wrestling recap one in a while. We're going to do that. And then Sunday will be another Music Weekly. That's going to wrap things up for this week. For Chris and Mike and everybody else, and thank you to everybody out there following along. This is Matt saying so long. Don't forget to join the Empire, the Nerdcast Empire.